In the time before the Shattering, we know that the demigods ruled over their individual domains that fell under the umbrella of their Elden Lord. Beneath these demigods, there were nobles of various houses, and beneath them, the common folk. Once we found our way to the lands between, the various lesser rulers of this place, in many cases, are all but forgotten. Very few noble houses remain, and their names have been lost to the ages. We need only look at the many wandering nobles to see the kind of damage that's been done to all those who are granted land under the rule of the demigods. Precious few houses remain somewhat intact, with Kenneth Haight coming to mind as one of the only people we meet from what was, presumably, a noble family granted land in Limgrave. However, there is another family name that held weight in the lands between, that has not yet vanished altogether. Far to the north in the Altus Plateau, just below Mount Gelmir, there is a castle, shaded by the mountains surrounding it, and covered in fetid poison. It is here where we can learn of House Marais, their duty, their offspring, and their downfall. Thank you for joining us for this week's Lore Dive, where we intend to share everything we've found related to the Marais family. If this is your first time finding the channel, welcome. We hope you enjoy our content. With over 100 episodes in our Elden Lore playlist, you should be able to find the answers to any burning questions you may have about the lands between. But if not, just let us know so we can dig into them for you. This particular video was requested by a few different commenters, so we really do pay attention to what our community wants to know when choosing these topics. With that said, we want to take a minute to thank this week's sponsor on the channel, Factor. Factor is a meal subscription service that can take the stress out of planning your weekly dinner schedule by providing you with fresh, chef-crafted, never-frozen meals that are ready to eat in just 2 minutes. With over 35 weekly menu options to choose from, you can plan your meals for the week without having to consider what's in your fridge. Thanks to Factor, you can eliminate the hassle of prepping, cooking, or cleaning up. Personally, between my 9 to 5, working on the channel, and being a dad, I found that lunch has become a meal where I'm all too happy to grab some leftovers and run out the door. But thanks to Factor, I don't have to think about whether dinner from a few nights ago is still good, or if I need to throw together a sandwich. I have a high-quality, health-conscious lunch waiting for me every day. Personally, my favorite meal was the herbed Greek chicken and tomato penne with Parmesan broccoli. I could literally eat this for every meal. The broccoli is wildly good, and the fresh tomatoes make all the difference when it comes to that next-level flavor. Not to mention, you never know this was heat-and-eat chicken. When they say their food is fresh, they're not kidding. It tastes just like it came out of the kitchen. Head to Factor75.com or click the link below and use code SQUARETABLE50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next box. That's code SQUARETABLE50 at Factor75.com to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box while your subscription is active. Thanks again to Factor for helping to support the channel. And with that said, let's get back to the topic at hand. The story of House Marais is nearing its end once we find our way to the Shaded Castle. So let's go as far back as we can in its history, before taking a look at what's become of it. The Marais mask tells us the role this noble family played in the Golden Order long ago. Mask in the image of a white-haired young noble, customarily worn by the head of House Marais. The Marais family has a dual history spanning generations, serving as both executioners and castellans of the Shaded Castle. This mask bears the likeness of the first of their line. The Marais family held the immense responsibility of carrying out executions on behalf of the Golden Order. It's hard to believe there was any kind of judicial system in the lands between, when we know the might of these demigods and their forces. You would think those that break their laws would be put to the sword and that would be the end of it. But it seems this was not the case. When someone broke the law in the lands between severely enough to be put to death, they were sent to the Shaded Castle for House Marais to perform their execution. From Elmer of the Briar's armor and weapon, we learn how executions were performed in the Shaded Castle. First, the guilty would be covered in briars, just as Elmer was. His armor tells us, the winding, rusted iron briars are a mark of the guilty, and typically indicate a sentence of death. Elmer murdered numerous instructors and merchants, and was known as the Bell-Bearing Hunter. It's safe to assume that the crime of murdering merchants and instructors is what earned Elmer his sentencing. And it's likely he was not known as Elmer of the Briar until after his armor was wrapped in this gnarled metal. We have a video on the Bell-Bearing Hunter himself if you'd like to learn more about his story, but for now we'll stick to broad strokes. Thanks to his weapon, the Marais Executioner's sword, we know that this legendary blade was used in the execution of those sent to the Shaded Castle. So it's safe to assume that if you were sentenced to death, you were likely beheaded by those that served the Castellan of the castle, the current head of the Marais family. Speaking of the Marais family, we learn quite a bit about them from the Marais robe. Robe with a black mantle across the shoulders, customarily worn by the head of House Marais. The sons of House Marais are all sickly born. Little wonder that Malay Marais would be so beguiled by the beautiful and fierce goddess who was born into rot. It would make sense for any born near the Shaded Castle to be sickly, as poison surrounds the area, and by the time we make our way there, it seeped its way inside. I believe this is not due to the influence of Malay Marais, who we'll talk about shortly, but rather a feature of the land that the Shaded Castle was built on. If the castle was meant to instill fear and punish the guilty, a poisonous swamp would be a fitting place for these sentences to be carried out. While the sons of House Marais were born sickly, they nevertheless carried out their duty working on behalf of the capital city. They were likely very knowledgeable about the lands between, as it was their business to be informed of who needed to be put to death and why. And it would seem that to the last head of the house, Malay Marais, there was one demigod who stood out amongst the others. A woman born sickly, afflicted with rot, whom he may have seen as a kindred spirit. A woman he felt a deep, possibly fanatical connection to, Malenia. Being raised amongst a poisoned land, Malay was likely aware of the old legends of the rot goddess and the swordsman who locked her away. He came into ownership of the Antspur rapier and wields the poison mist incantation, which tells us, "Those who dwell within poison know rot all too well, the death that begets life, that comes to all equally." That is to say, it is the cycle of rebirth put into practice. Thanks to the Antspur rapier, we know he kept his studies a secret, and it was in this research that he came to know Malenia was the second coming of the goddess of rot. Scarlet Rot is an old legend, of which Malay Marais of the Shaded Castle was a private believer, and indeed he eventually found his own personal goddess. After this, his love for Malenia became a sort of open secret amongst the residents of the castle. Inside the Shaded Castle, we can find the Valkyrie prosthesis, which is described as a golden prosthesis once used by the one-armed Valkyrie. A masterwork of craftsmanship. With practice and skill, it can be used proficiently as a real arm. When Malay Marais, Lord of the Shaded Castle, embraced this prosthesis, he claimed to feel the presence of his personal goddess. If I had to venture a guess, the reason we find the Clean Rot Knights in the Shaded Castle, patrolling the areas above the poisoned grounds below, is that they presented Malay with this prosthesis in order to earn their place. We can see the reaction of those who served the Shaded Castle to their master's obsession through a ghost we can find while exploring the area. House Marais is ruined, just deserts for falling for that severed harpy. No surprise that guilty Cretan took the castle and our storied sword. Obviously, the severed harpy would be Malenia, as she's missing multiple limbs that have been replaced. But what's more interesting with this piece of dialogue is that it may confirm Malay's romantic feelings towards Malenia specifically, and not the more ambiguous idea of the goddess of rot. This is all but confirmed when we enter the room where we face Elmer of the Briar, and find a portrait of Malenia hung prominently behind the table where House Marais likely had their final words with prisoners before their execution. Before getting into the current state of Malay Marais, we wanted to call out another enemy we face who can be found wearing this house's robe, Chief Guardian Arganthi. Arganthi is the woman we find at the Guardian's garrison in the Mountaintop of Giants, wielding the one-eyed shield of the Fell God, and the keeper of the spell, Flame of the Felled God, which was stolen by Adon, Thief of Fire. You may be asking what the connection could possibly be between the Marais family and Arganthi, but her mask along with her robes may hold the answer. The ruler's mask tells us it is a mask in the image of a wizened sage, customary dress among lords in a smaller nation. Such a mask illustrates the qualities of an ideal lord, chiefly, wise, and possessing a certain defanged geniality. One at the center of society often finds these qualities most expedient. So Arganthi is a lord, or rather a lady, that comes from a smaller nation, perhaps a lady of the Shaded Castle, as it seems only the men of their lineage took over as Castellan. The fact that she wears the Marais robe seals this connection for me, as this character could have achieved almost the exact same look by wearing the official's attire, and FromSoft made the conscious decision to go with the Marais robe instead. Also, if we take a look at the face models for both Malay and Arganthi, we do see some similarities. While their skin tones are wildly different, and Arganthi has the red hair associated with those who came to wield the giant's flame, they share this same withered skin, possibly due to being born amongst the fetid lands of the Shaded Castle. If we're correct here, I believe the implication could be that Arganthi was the Marais family's firstborn, and given that she was not a boy, she was passed on to become Castellan, and instead found herself as head of the Fire Monks, those meant to contain the flame of the Fell God, before ultimately falling to its influence. With the story of the Marais family now unraveled, there's still the question of what happened to the Shaded Castle's current Castellan, Malay. As we know, Elmer of the Briar took the Shaded Castle for himself after murdering his executioners, and you would assume he would then bring his sword down upon Malay's head, but that's not the case. However it happened, Malay escaped the carnage of that day and made his way out of the Shaded Castle. It would seem he had some intention of taking back his station, because he didn't go far after making his way out. If we look to the west of the castle, we can see an open area covered in broken statues, possibly grave markers of previous members of the Marais family, and among them stands Malay himself. If you get too close, he will fight you alongside a guardian golem, who may have been the protector of this area. Malay will try desperately to afflict you with rot and poison, but will ultimately fall to your blade, marking the end of House Marais. The sickly man who carried out the sentencing of countless prisoners on behalf of the Golden Order, who allowed his castle to fall to ruin so he could worship at the feet of the goddess of Rot, who had his castle and storied sword taken from him by a man he was charged with executing, will die amongst his family, never to see the goddess he loves so dearly rise to power, leaving his home a fetid mess it will never recover from. This is how the story of the Shaded Castle comes to an end. Its walls crumbling, its Castellan cast aside, and its land sinking into an ever-expanding swamp of poison and rot. Thank you for joining us for this week's lore dive into House Marais and the history of the Shaded Castle. Do you believe Malay Marais ever actually met with Malenia, or did he admire her from afar? Is Chief Guardian Arganthi a member of the Marais family who was sent to the Guardian garrison by the Golden Order? How do you think Malay came into possession of the Valkyrie prosthesis? How many times did you have to fight Elmer of the Briar in the Shaded Castle before you finally took him down? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell, and set notifications to all so you never miss out on any of our lore dives. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden Lore.